to the GRC Room for how to govern Agentic AI. I'm Mike Andrews here once again with Karina Klever of Klever Compliance, and we're happy to welcome Supro Ghose, who's a CISO advisor at Graphene Security. Before we get moving, just a couple of notes for you. Please feel free to leave comments and we'll get to them as soon as possible. If it's not while we're live, it'll be shortly after. Also, if you haven't already, please check out the GRC Room YouTube channel and consider subscribing. On there, you'll be able to find this webinar, all our other ones, clips, and more. So, without further ado, let me pass it to Karina for a brief introduction, then we'll learn more about Supro.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mike, and we are so happy to have you. Thank you. So my name is Karina Klever, and I'm the founder of Klever Compliance, and I'm going to go ahead and kick off the first question. So what was it that initially got you focused on governing Agentic AI?
Karina, Mike, thank you for having me on the show. I really appreciate it. Well, my name is Supro Ghose, and I'm a CISO advisor and fractional CISO for a while now. I've been a CISO for about 22 years. Now, in my journey, what I've seen is in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of AI slowly coming in. Initially there was the waiting for AI, and then AI showed up, and then we started coming up with, okay, how are we going to govern AI? So I was tracking the technology's progress and trying through all the oversight and governance implications. And to be honest, my thinking about agentic AI wasn't that crisp. I kind of thought, okay, we are governing AI, and agentic AI should be similar. Well, the real eye-opener was OpenClaw. And let me tell you, I think that OpenClaw was the real eye-opener for a lot of people. And this is what put agentic AI behavior in a very concrete and operational context, right? And made the governance gaps very, very clear. And these are things that, hey, how do we get our knowledge? We go to vendor briefings, we go to tech shows, but I don't think people really understood what agentic AI's the governance part of it, and also exactly what it could do, and especially the destructive side of it. And that exercise really gave us a lot of insight and specificity that we didn't have before. And it fundamentally reframed how I thought about the problem, to be honest.
Yeah, it's definitely new, but it seems like there's a wide spectrum of this. Some companies think you have to govern it in a completely different way, like nothing. We can't use any of that old stuff there. And then you have other companies that don't acknowledge the differences and think, oh, this is just GRC, it's just software. Let's just govern it the same way. But really, it's kind of in the middle, probably, to where you have to be. So, Supro, since you started diving into agentic AI and governing it, what's been your top lesson learned so far?
I think my learning, and I spent a lot of time understanding OpenClaw, because we talk about technologies, but when we haven't seen it in action, it's very difficult to know what it is, especially the destructive side of it that we saw, and it revealed certain control gaps. And to be honest, we didn't have that in our existing environment. Okay, so we really had to understand. And some of the other, I felt like I was going into 2701 or FedRAMP or NIST 853, where we always look into a boundary. So we really had to understand this agent's boundary. Okay, what exactly can it do? What can it do inside and potentially do outside? What is the accountability chain? What is the blast radius? And you got to do this before, not after the exercise, or you have an incident that forces the conversation. So the frameworks that we've been relying on were usually built for human actors, okay? And you always kind of had a human in the chain. But over here, these guys were, talking amongst themselves, discussing amongst themselves, taking action amongst themselves, these autonomous systems, but taking this standard GRC that you had and retrofitting them for these autonomous systems that could think, act, and react is very difficult. And it's And it's very difficult, and it's also very difficult to kind of retrofit it if you haven't thought about that assumption from day one. So the traditional governance, usually as we know it, always, and Karina would say it better than I could probably, is that there's a human. There's a human in the loop. And you're auditing their actions and you're looking at what they're doing and things like that. You have an audit plan, and we go through the audit plans, and that's how we do it. But in this case, we have something very, very different. We have something that is kind of working on their own. And with agentic AI, decisions cascade at machine speed across systems. And before any human has any chance to intervene, an action takes place. So you're no longer governing behavior, you're governing potential, which requires an entirely different control philosophy.
So I think I'd like to add that from a tactical perspective, one of the oldies but goodies is asset management, right? So your API listing and your inventory of APIs, just like you have an inventory of people who have physical access and people who have logical access, we also need to have an inventory of the system to system access and what kind of data is passed there. I think that's the first thing. The second thing is, I don't believe that people are using vendor management from a governance perspective very well in general right now. And I think that if they up that game and they have the due diligence and they ask the questions, okay, I want to use AI. Well, where are you storing my data? Right? What kind of data do you have access to? So I think that those two competency areas, we had one client recently who turned on an API 8 years ago. Well, the contract with that vendor ended 3 years ago. It was a 5-year term. And so now, meanwhile, the API never got turned off. Bob, who had the access, he's gone, right? So people are afraid to turn off the API. But the issue is, unless you have that asset inventory listing and include any AI connections and include AI due diligence in your vendor management program, there's definitely, we create this bigger gap long term.
Absolutely. And, in information security, we've got two terms, which is the attack surface management and the continuous threat exposure management. Those are two things that are looking at your attack surface, and especially what are some of the new nuances. Because, you have an API, but there's so many new API attacks that are coming in, right? So you have to know your asset, especially, one of the things that I keep on saying, and you got to start from the basics. SANS Institute used to have the number one, which is now called the CIS Control One. And Karina, I know you're smiling there. And the number one was know your software and know your hardware assets. Because how can you manage if you don't know what you have to manage? I mean, this is meat and potatoes. This is the basics. Yeah. So totally agree with you.
Yeah. What's funny is, like, when I think of governing AI, like the three sharpest minds that I can think of, they all talk about these things constantly. Like,
yes,
knowing your hardware, software, knowing your data classification, your data flow. It's that part is traditional GRC, and that part still works in this realm too. So good information. So those two questions were just for Supro. So now we're going to bounce it back and forth between Karina and Supro. So first question here for the panel, with Supro going first. Traditional governance versus governing agentic AI. What would you say is the most significant difference?
Yeah, and I think I covered this a little bit, that, traditional, as I mentioned, there's a human in the loop, okay? You can write an audit plan for it, okay? And typically what we do is, auditors, or even if I'm an assessor, I have an assessment plan, I have an audit plan, and it's predictive to the most part. And we are going in and saying, okay, has it been designed correctly? Okay, the controls have been designed correctly. And then is it then operating correctly? Now with agentic AI, it's unless until you know exactly all the actions it can take, the decisions are cascading at machine speed. There are a lot of things that are happening very quickly before any human has any chance to intervene. So you're no longer governing behavior, as I mentioned, you're governing potential, and which requires an entirely different control philosophy. So this is an area that is, it's a real concern, and I'm sure we're going to get a lot of thought-provoking discussions in this area, like we're having today, in other areas too, because auditors are going to say, okay, how are we going to audit this? How do we know? So, as we talk about it, there are a couple of areas that are kind of emerging, but that's what I would say are some of the differences between traditional governance and agentic AI governance.
Yeah. Well said. Karina, for you, what's the most significant difference between the two?
So I think that we're needing to rely more on those perimeter security controls, right? Where we're not allowing and like old school blacklisting, old school whitelisting, approved technologies. There was a comment that talked about what's under the hood. Absolutely, very, very hard to decipher, but you have to have that engine compartment blocked off, right? And so then you know a little bit more about what's coming and what's going, and knowing your technology, I think, is what I'm going to keep coming back to. Also, I'm not seeing people wanting to write AI policies. It's very, executive leadership typically toggles between, well, I want people to be creative and I want people to come up with solutions, but then I'm kind of afraid of my environment and I'm not sure what it's going to do, and shadow IT and these kinds of things. So people are looking for your guidance, right? And the most important, the best, easiest way to actually put guidance on top of usage is have a solid data classification policy.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning, here's the data that we find most important. Usually there's 4 classification types. Here's the data we find least important. If we lose this data, company doesn't shut down. It takes time and it takes effort, and it's work that people don't really want to do. But when you classify your data, now you can associate that data classification with usage in technology and the different technology types you're using. Now you can better decipher and say, well, look, if it's identifiable information, never put that into AI. If it's a pizza flyer, you can use it in AI all day long, every day, and you can use the open ones. But making those business decisions is probably the most important thing. And AI is not going to tell you that. That's up to your business, your operations, your industry, your maturity, your level of policies that are enforceable, your level of exception handling, and whether or not that's being tracked, right? So to really align AI usage with your actual company, take some thought and take some due diligence, and it takes knowing your own environment.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, especially, you have a lot of people taking an AI policy from different places and just applying it. You can't do that, because you have to come up with the AI policy depending on first your business model and exactly what is it that you do. Like if you're a manufacturing company, if you are a software company, if you're just a services company, very, very different. Because when you're manufacturing software, then probably you have to come up with a lot of SSDLC, which is the software development lifecycle processes embedded into your development lifecycle, because you might be using live coding or using AI as different parts of your SDLC. It's a very different policy from a services organization, which might be using AI in a lot of their products, like the SaaS products they're using. And of course, as you rightly pointed out, customer data, PII data, confidential data, those need to be protected, tagged, and ensured that it doesn't go out of the perimeter. So it's, as I call it, different strokes for separate folks.
Yeah.
Yeah, good point. So Supro, say there's a SMB that's on the fence about deploying agentic AI. They see the pros, but they also have some certain things they're not sure about. What governance questions should they be thinking about?
Well, some are old school. This is nothing new. I mean, anytime you're deploying a new capability, you have to know why you're deploying that capability, right? So having good requirements, good understanding, what capability are you getting? And when this agentic AI has been allowed, what are some of the actions it could take? And what's the worst action could it take? Like I was just talking to a client this morning, and they have a certain use case, and they were saying, "I'm really scared of turning this on." I said, "You should, because if your agent goes and suddenly goes rogue and goes and deletes your file server, what you gonna do?" Okay, and I asked him like, "Okay, you're being forced. Your hand is being forced." Okay, this is a director of IT, that your hand is being forced. If that data gets wiped out, how's your air gap strategy? How's your backup strategy? It is such a cascade because you have to really understand the worst action that it can take, and then ask whether you can reconstruct everything as the agent did in sequence after the fact. Because auditability is not negotiable. Finally, ask who is accountable if something goes wrong. Because if that answer isn't specific, then you're not ready to deploy.
Yeah. Great point. Karina, how would you answer that one?
I think if and wherever possible, look at the contract. Now, contracts in bigger organizations are one of those you kind of throw it over the fence and hope to God that, legal knows what to look for from a technology perspective. But you got to keep in mind when the legal department gets a technology contract, they're assuming that the tech guys already scanned it and it's all good. So you have to work through that assumption very carefully. And most contracts will say, we're not responsible for your data. Most contracts will say, you're not going to get your data back if we break up. Most contracts will say, you're actually okay with us passing your data to whoever we want to. Those are our subservice organizations. So if and whenever possible, take a look at that contract before signing on the dotted line. And the second most important thing I found that's been very useful is people have created very isolated environments for their own use of AI that is specific to their own company, their own business, their own policies, their own operations. And the AI that's sitting on top of their own data seems to work much better because it becomes kind of an isolated source of information instead of, look, I remember when the internet came out, right? Boy, it was so authoritarian. The encyclopedia in the library because the library's closed and it's Sunday night and you're trying to do a project for school. I remember when we didn't have access to the internet. I remember when the internet came out and it was so important and authoritarian. And as a user, you assume that everything on the internet is true. The reality, in a little bit, we found out not everything on the internet is true. But so now take that and extrapolate it into AI. The internet teaches AI. So now when you're using data sets that are multi-million percentage magnified with this data that isn't always true, you're also going to get results that are not always true. You put in that people pleaser kind of effect that AI has. It's something that we all need to keep in mind of. And look, we are all kindred souls as well. Like if I bicycle ride, I'm going to have friends that are bicycle riders. That's already your bias. If I went to a particular university, I'm going to gravitate just out of nature to people who also went to that university as well, because we have a common language. We have some common ground. And which is why people join the GRC room. They want tool agnostic, non-sponsored conversations about really how do I do GRC? How do I deal with what's out there right now in the governance space and with all of this stuff coming at me? And so that's why people show up. We all are kindred. We are kindred souls. And what that means is the bias that you see in AI is just from this behavior that we have as humans as well. So these are all things to really look out for very carefully as you go on and use it and implement it in your company.
Yeah, that's great information. And that is so important because AI, it's scanning the internet for a lot of these answers. What I keep seeing is that Reddit's actually like the #1 place it looks, or at least some of them. And that's kind of scary because that place it's just wild on there. So I've been dabbling around to see how far this goes, and I'd encourage anyone on the call to do the same. For example, I asked it to compare our company, Yastis, to Mandiant, which is a multi-billion-dollar cybersecurity company. And it gave a great analysis, but it made it sound like we're the same thing. Like here we have Apple, it's like you could go this way or you can go this way. And it's like, I think our company's capable, but if you're a Fortune 50 companies. Should you be working with us? You never know, but Mandiant is probably more suited for that. But if you went off AI information alone, it wouldn't do that, because the AI is really just going to our website, looking at LinkedIn and stuff like that. It doesn't really know, and the outcomes can be kind of crazy with this. But you both were talking about contracts. So next question for Karina. When it comes to compliance and contractual obligations, what challenges do you see that you think are the most serious?
Gosh, I think I jumped the gun on this one, right? So,
No,
so again,
no, perfect timing.
so contract subservice organizations is number one. SOC 2 conveniently carves out subservice organizations, right? They're like, oh, these controls, yeah, no, I've transferred my risk. It's over there. It's over there, my vendors, right? So subservice organizations, make sure you understand, know if you're going to get your data back, know what the breach notification period is. So in EU, we have a thing called NIST2 NIS, and then the number 2, not NIST NIST like we use frequently here. So NIST2 actually beautifully, and I'm such a big fan, goes and specifies the timing requirements based on the level of severity of the breach, right? And it forces also supply chain controls that are very, very stringent, that we, a lot of the frameworks regulations we see here in the US, they'll kind of have some passive controls on the back end, kind of just, put it under the rug. But this has a very whole big section on supply chain. And we have a client that uses NIST2, and it's a wonderful thing to see the diligence that's required there, because they kind of caught on to the fact, wait a minute, everybody might be doing everything right, but what happens to your data, right? It's expensive to store data. That's why that salesperson is telling you, you have to store everything, including publicly available data. You have to even encrypt publicly available data so they can send you a bigger bill, folks, right? If you have proper data classification, you don't need to do that due diligence with your publicly available data. Your more important data sources, absolutely, yes, protected. So now your subservice organization is going to take your data and they're going to go send it somewhere else. And those guys are going to go send it somewhere else. And those guys are going to go send it somewhere else. And all the way downstream, guess what? You don't have the controls that you would have normally. You don't have the access controls, the environmental controls, your UPSs, your perimeter security, your alert. You don't have any of that, right? So contractually understand, what are the subservice organization obligations? How fast are you going to get notified of a breach? Access control. Who has access to my data? A lot. And when are you going to get your data back, if you ever are, right? And are they even accountable for your data? Because the contracts will say, we're not even responsible. Whatever you put in our system, it's up to you. You could put in your dog's names and then your cat's names and then your iguana's names. We don't care. We're not responsible for that data. So it's very important to understand the business function that those companies are aligned to in your actual operations before you go putting in that data in, and determine whether that's really, really needed, the data that's being put in there. The one additional thing I'm going to say is understand their use of AI with your data. So that should also be a contractual kind of obligation. Go ahead.
Yeah, great point. I saw a post on LinkedIn within the past week. It said that we should use the term third-party risk management less, because that undersells the importance of considering what they're doing with their data, and if they're passing it off to someone else too. You got to think. We have to think past that first layer. So maybe a term more like vendor management, supply chain risk management is more suitable.
And the one thing I'm going to add, I'm sorry, it's probably not my turn. You are still responsible for your data, regardless of where you send it. This is a very important point. Do not think that because you have a contract that you haven't even really read with a vendor that you're sending your data to, you're all good. It's over there. You are still responsible for deciding which vendor gets what level of access into your system, or what information you are relinquishing to them, what kind of assets you're relinquishing to them. Now, you can have contractual connections with that vendor, but ignorance is no longer a cause, a good cause. Oh, I don't know. I sent it to my vendor. They got rid of it. There was, really quickly, I got to go through a lawsuit, actual lawsuit. Executive is talking to the salesperson. They meet, I think, once a quarter or once a year. Salesperson is using Otter AI. This is a true lawsuit. I am not making this up. I was just following it, though. Salesperson starts relinquishing all kinds of information about the organization, about the budget, about the projects, about what got funded, about the reorgs, about who's horrible in the office and who isn't, who's a good golf player and who isn't, right? Relinquishing all kinds of information. This is all being recorded. That data storage that Otter AI used to do the transcription gets hacked. The executive gets pulled into the boardroom and is asked by all of the board members, why are you giving away all of the information about our company? And he's like, what are you talking about? This is my heart. I would never give any kind of information out. It's all on the dark web. It's all available openly. There was a lawsuit. So who's liable? Right? Because that contract, now that company is still liable because that contract was not signed with the right amount of due diligence.
Yeah, and privacy, which is an area that I, dabble in once in a while. There's this whole notion about data controller, right? Who's the data controller, and who is the responsible party? And especially in, when you have an agent acting autonomously. So as you mentioned, the control of data is important. When you've given it to someone, who's the data controller? And I think, Karina, you also mentioned a little bit about data residency. I mean, data residency is such an important thing because you have your agent going all over the place, pulling data. I mean, we don't even have to go to EU. You have California. I mean, if you're pulling data and CCPA, there are certain rights. You have to let the person opt out. So it becomes very complex when these agents are pulling data from multiple sources. So unless, I guess, some of the regulators and some of the courts catch up, I guess we are kind of writing our own governance over here.
Yeah. And I mean, I find it very unfortunate. I think it's a national crisis that no one's talking about. You go on HHS OCR, publicly available breach reports, all companies that have to be governed by HIPAA, that are governed by HIPAA, they have to report if they've lost over 500 individual names or not. It's consistently been over 300 million people in the US with 700 to 800 providers of service constantly breaching, sometimes several times in that report cycle. That's over 80% of the population literally has been hacked. This is healthcare. This is our kids. This is moms and dads and brothers and sisters. And it's just such a tragedy. I don't know why people are not jumping up and down about this and livid over it. I am, because I'm a very private person. I don't do anything on social media by design. Nobody knows anything about my private life unless I let them know. And it's just a huge liability for us. We're doing something wrong, damn it.
Yeah. So Supro, on the compliance and contractual obligation side, what are your top concerns as far as challenges?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned, there are regulatory frameworks, the vendor contracts, and these were written not for autonomous systems, right? These were written with humans in the loop. So, as I mentioned earlier, the data controller part of it, or the responsible party part of it, becomes very important when these agents kind of act autonomously. So, we have to make sure that when we are having Agentic AI doing autonomous tasks, we still comply with some of the rules that we initially set up, right? So that's where you have to, I talked about the walled garden, or as we used to call it in the past, making sure you know exactly what the boundaries are, like we do in when we are doing a FedRAMP, or if you're doing ISO 2701, you have to know exactly what the boundaries are. If you don't have an agentic AI that is, it's going to go out and get data. Reddit's not a good source of data because it's got a lot of talent. That Reddit is out of bounds. That is not good threat intel. I mean, a lot of people go to Reddit or they go to Quora or they go to some of the dark web forums and they try and figure out if there's a hack or something like that. Now, you just can't take it and use it. There has to be a human in the loop because some of that could be just tainted data or your agent might be hallucinating.
Yeah. So you talk about human in the loop, Supro. This leads us into our next question. One of the main words we think of when we hear agentic AI is autonomy. So over time, how can we determine the right balance of human intervention versus autonomy?
So a couple of weeks ago, this came up in a discussion, and the speaker at that time came up with a term that I really liked. And this is not my own, so I'm just going to tell you what it is. I actually wrote that one down at that time, and it's called the error consequence curve. And what the error consequence curve is, as the consequence of a incorrect or a wrong decision increases, okay? So if you do something and as the consequence of that decision, the consequence of that decision increases, the threshold for human review should also increase proportionately. So if you have something that can, I mean, this is an acute case, go wipe out your entire file server, then yes, guess what? The human review is very important. And initially, what you should do is start with very high intervention and deliberately dial the autonomy up only as your confidence in that agent decision patterns is validated. Now, this is not new. This is something we have done in the past. Remember on mainframes when we had jobs running? Jobs got to do a lot of different things. You just didn't run a job to go insert things in a database and say, I'll see you tomorrow morning. No. If you have a job going and making changes to production databases, you had to have a certain amount of confidence. You had to test it out. You had to give it different scenarios, different safe scenarios. And then as your confidence grew, you let it run overnight, right? But before you did that, you had to build that level of, I would say, reliability into that thing, into that specific job. So the goal isn't to minimize human involvement. It is to reserve the human judgment for the decisions that actually warrant it.
Yeah, great point with that. Karina, how would you answer this one?
All I'm thinking of is change management, right? And the levels of change management that you have, right? You have your more extraneous workflow, and many organizations are just handling change management in a very sloppy manner as well, where you have different environments first, right? Something wrong runs in staging before it hits production for 2 weeks, right? And before that, you have the dev and the test and the QA, right? And some change management workflows require successful tasks to be completed before it even hits change management for that approval, right? Some are more standardized, and before you touch production, you actually get that approval beforehand. But the reality is, not only are we many times lackadaisical with our existing change management process, so we can't do full BIAs a lot of times. We don't have full rollback plans a lot of times, right? So a lot of times the impact to the business is not very well understood. Blackout windows aren't maintenance windows aren't well defined. It all comes down to defining the business requirements and the business operations. And do I know a workflow well enough? Meaning I know where it triggers, what data is used, who touches it, what the target conditions are in the end. Do I know that workflow well enough? Because if I do, go automate it. Absolutely. But if you know that workflow well enough, the operations well enough, now you can start putting controls around it. So that's my answer to that. Whether it's AI solutionized or on an AS400 or something else, form that you're using, right? If you know the workflow well enough and you can govern that workflow and you know the target outcome, then yes, please use it and please automate it.
Yeah, well said. John Korsick said, Mike, you're wrong about Reddit. Many CISOs go there to talk about their challenges with peers. And that made a good point. And trust me, I get that. I get that. It's a discussion forum. What I'm saying is it's not always fact. There is a lot of fact there, but it's an AI can present it as fact. As long as we're aware that AI might be bringing us information and sources that might be just opinions, I think that's completely fine. For that, Reddit's definitely a good research point to see what people are thinking.
Yeah, but Mike, to that point and to support your argument, when CISOs are going there, there's a human in the loop. Okay, it's not an agent going and taking that data and considering a process. When a person is getting that data, it's filtering it, putting it into context. Yes, you can have agents who can do that. I mean, listen, AI today is way smarter than one individual. It's a group of individuals, as I was trying to explain to someone the other day. And it's the collective wisdom. And there's so much learning that you can take actions. But the point is, still, there's a human in the loop.
Oh yeah. There's heavy moderation on there.
Correct.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. So next question for Karina. With Agentic AI, what's the top thing you see companies getting wrong today?
They follow the shiny. They think that they get a subscription to something and all their problems are going to go away. All gone.
Yeah.
Right? It's like who was the witch in the American in the 70s? She twiddled her nose and all of a sudden everything went okay. I forgot the name of the character, but it's a very cultural thing in America. But if you slap on tool on top of tool on top of tool on top of tool, your problems are not going to go away because those tools are not targeted to what you're trying to solve. And the way you understand what you're trying to solve is to know your own workflow and to define your own business and to have your own defined operations with the control points. GRC started as that ultimate dashboard, right? It literally started as I have key functions in my company and I want to know how well they're doing. Which controls are breaking along the way, and that broken control, I'll go open up a risk registry item and I'll go mitigate it and track it to completion. Maybe I'll update the policy, maybe I'll make a tweak, but I want to know things are broken. And that control is really originally always intended to know whether or not the operations are going well. That's point number one. I think that swivel chair, for instance, the swivel chair burnout we have, there are so many tools in IT that are many of them legacy from 4 bosses ago. And, they continue to stack on tools, but what you're creating for your humans is these swivel chair operations. Okay, you got a red UI or a green UI or a yellow UI or a blue UI. Many of them are getting data from the exact same source, but you're forcing your people to sit there and do swivel chair operations. You're burning them out. You're creating single points of failure where they literally are unable to determine what is the real truth that I'm supposed to be focusing in on. There's discombobulation and disconnect through all of these tools. So don't continue to do the same thing in your other parts of the environment. Don't continue to stack tools and what we call a toolard at Klever Compliance. People come to us and they're like, hey, we want you to sponsor us. We want you to be a salesperson for us and help us sell our tool at your client sites. We don't do that because we come into clients and we see that they have more tools than they know what the hell to do with to start with. So our first conversations is usually, how do we simplify this and create something that really aligns to your true operations? And if AI is one of those tools, do it. But you have to know your own operations and business well enough to solutionize that.
Yeah. Good point. Supro, what would you say is the top thing you see companies getting wrong today with Agentic AI?
Well, I started off the discussion initially by saying that when I saw Agentic AI coming, I thought, I have an AI policy, I have a responsible AI policy, I have AI, the technical policy, which is mapped to the OWASP AI framework, and I'm doing a lot of the things right. I'm sure Agentic AI is going to cover this too. So going back to my realization through the OpenClaw incident, I think you have to think about Agentic AI a little differently. I don't think it's the same thing that is going to work for your standard AI platform. So think about it as a new category of products that needs its own identity, its own permissions, and especially permissions within what each agent can do with each other and how and what the data is, what is the trust boundary. And also you have to know, when the agents are acting, are they acting at a user level? Are they acting at an administrator level, a super admin user level? So IAM becomes very important. I mean, as you know, in the cloud, we have a very important notion that IAM is very important because you could do different things with different rights on the cloud. And that's why, whenever I work in an environment which has got a lot of AWS in there and they're using organizations, I bulk, because that's where you have to use something like Control Tower, because you don't have any control over what your IAM entities are. So same here, you've got a lot of these agents that are being spawned to do specific tasks. What is the identity? What are they doing? What kind of privilege do they have? And what kind of data can they pull, as we talked previously? So that trust boundary, that access boundary, that credential boundary, I think those are things you have to think about, and not think about some of the previous paradigms that we have and say, we've done this for AI, it's going to work over here. No, if you're going to go in for it, do it in a systematic manner. Do your DFDs, data flow diagrams, do your specific threat models, and really look at it from a myopic view. Actually, you have to really know what these agents are doing and know what the worst case is.
The way you ended that response, Supro, is perfect lead in to our next question, which is scenario time. So for Supro, say Agentic AI makes $1 million mistake for SMB, maybe even larger. What would the aftermath look like?
Well, every time you have a crisis, the first thing one thinks about is how do you bring operations back, right? And if you've had a database issue or you have a DR situation, and we talk about RTO and RPO and things like that. And one of the things we look at the log, because depending on your recovery point, you will have a certain amount of data that you have to commit from your logs. And one of the first things people realize is, oh my God, I may not be logging enough. And I really cannot reconstruct what the agent did or why. Oops. So really going back to, again, basics, do your tabletops and understand that if you have a situation, do you have the logs? First, you have the backups. And then depending on the RTO and RPO, look at the logs and see if your logs can bring the system back up. So that's your DRBCP part of it. And then, of course, comes the whole legal and regulatory exposure. I mean, the financial exposure is always there, but there's a legal and regulatory exposure. And you just cannot say AI did it. I mean, Karina mentioned it previously. Yeah, AI did it, but did you know what it could do? So that is the question that your regulators, your insurance companies, and counterparties that may have contractual claims may ask you for. And if you have an incident response playbook, update it all the time with all these new scenarios, as I mentioned. And if you have an agentic AI deployment, add that into your scenario. Do your tabletop. understand how you're going to recover a lot of those things. And if you don't have the appropriate logs, this is the time to go fix it.
Yeah. So I'm going to add, this is akin to saying, well, I have a car, and the car decided to go drive and hit somebody and kill them. Sorry, I have a car, and it's the car's fault. And the reality is these are still mechanical things at the end of the day, right? And so, again, you are responsible for what you are doing with your mechanical things. The mechanical things break. Many breaches are as a result of third parties that lose your data. Very, very many, but most of the significant ones that we hear about, it's either access control or it's either third-party risk management. And the one thing I'm going to add about logs, very important. When you're doing a postpartum, when you've been breached and you're sitting with 3-4 letter agencies at the table and your insurance company and your agents on speed dial, and you're trying to get money through that cyber insurance policy, and you're sitting in front of the board and you're trying to explain what the hell happened, many, 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 many times when you start looking at those logs, the answers have always been there. You just miss them. If you're doing logging the right way, especially an insider threat, a lot of us have logs because the regulation tells us to do it. There's a control that says it, and okay, we're doing logs, leave me alone. Here's the logs, auditor. But the real purpose of the logs is to actually get knowledge from them and operationalize what those logs are trying to tell you. And so you have to be able to decipher that information and action it. And what we miss a lot, and again, postpartum after breach situations, unfortunately, the attorneys on the phone, the super expensive attorney, because they're cyber people, right? And there's so few of them out there in the industry. They're charging you $1 bazillion an hour, and you're sitting there looking through logs and you're like, my God, this has been here the whole time. And we just didn't see it because we weren't looking for it. We missed it. We were too busy. Very, very important. Thank you for that, Supro. That was a very important point.
Thank you.
Yeah, logs don't get enough attention until something goes wrong, but they should be part of our proactive activities as well, even more so, right? Because things change day to day. We can't assume it's good to go. Like just recently, I made a couple of posts about this. Google, they updated their Google Workspace settings to unleash a whole lot of new AI capability. They actually empowered users to go to the Google Workspace marketplace and use their own payment methods to just buy anything. So that brings in all these integrations. So all that vendor management stuff that you do, that AI governance stuff, well, Google's like, we'll take this stuff seriously, but we're going to help you out by letting you cool down a bit. We're gonna let your users do some stuff, and you have to account for this sort of thing. Google did send out an email saying this change is coming in 2 or 3 weeks to admins, but they send a lot of emails. A lot of companies didn't catch something like that, and then that brings things like change management into play. We often think of change management like just the stuff that we're considering. Well, what about the changes that someone else brings to us? How do we evaluate that? Do you just not consider that a change? That's still a change. So this brings us to the next question here. So Karina, there's a lot of people on this call. This attendance was close to our record breaker, like upwards of 1,600 people RSVP. There's at least a handful of people on this call, probably more, that want to do more with Agentic AI. Say there's an SMB founder on the call that is in that situation. What's the right way to govern this?
So the right way to govern this is, and by the way, thank you all for the RSVPs. And I know people write me afterwards and say, I caught this not during the live session, but people have the link and they really, really use it. So it's great that that's an available resource, and also check YouTube. So a few different things. Number one, know your data. Number two, have your inventory of your technology. Number 3, know your workflow. Know what you're trying to solve, right? Number 4, watch for access. The convenience is the devil right now, right? So a simple statement like, book me I want to go on a 2-week vacation in October. All of a sudden you've got access to credit cards, you've got access to calendar, you've got access to rewards accounts, you've got access to, so those very simple functions allow access at exponential levels. So know your access permissions that you're allowing for. And then number 5 is however much possible, understand the data that is being used for that solutioning because now you know your workflow, right? And that's what you're trying to solution. So make sure you know that. And then if you are using even a subscription-based AI service or a license or where your data is sitting somewhere else, read the contract. Don't fuzzy eye to it, because when you're literally standing in front of a judge and you're shutting your company down because that AI company that you relinquished all that power to went and lost your data, and now your proprietary information got taken by the competitor who has way more money than you, and they made the wonderful solution that you didn't get to, or whatever is the scenario, just read the contract. Pick up a phone and call a friend if you don't want to read the contract, right? Just understand what your liability is, because then you can make an intelligent risk. And you're accepting the risk because you're basically saying, hey, I accept what I know is being done with my data, or I don't. And if I don't, what are some of the compensating controls that I can put around it?
Yeah. Great response. Supro, for the SMB founder on the call that wants to implement Agentic AI, what would you say is the right way to govern this?
So I'm gonna first respond and say that there might be people on the call, and there might be an SMB founder, and that person might be thinking, "Oh, I'm not going to be using Agentic AI." I want to caution you: you are probably using Agentic AI today, and you don't know it. And the reason I say that is because I'm going to give you a scenario, okay? So say you have, I'm just going to pick a platform, okay? I'm not subscribing to any of these platforms. It's just an example. Say you have Salesforce, okay? You have Salesforce and you have a bot over there which is responding to your queries. The queries, and it can be any kind of customer service desk, okay, product. So you have a customer service desk product that has got a bot, and that bot is, it's your initial customer service, right? And that's what a lot of people are doing. It has a bot, you're sending the queries, and the query initially gives you responses, but then it has to find context. It'll ask you, hey, what's your account number? What was your last transaction? Does a little bit of validation to say who you are, to make sure, and that validation is coming from a validation database. Guess what? It didn't think about it itself. It is already talking to a validation database of your customers that could be on another contact management system like HubSpot or whatever, and getting some of that data. Then it tells you, okay, the last time you called, and that could be from your service desk or from your complaint management system, getting data saying that, hey, last time you called, you were talking about this. Is this what you're talking about? Now, in that complaint management system, there's a whole slew of notes. Some are internal, some are external. Did you tag it correctly? Going to Karina's point about data classification, a lot of that could be public, some of that could be confidential. Now, if you have customer notes over there in the customer management system, the bot doesn't know. Bot is happily going and pulling data and bringing it to you, and therefore you have to make sure that the data that you provide doesn't have anything sensitive. Like, it could be an internal thing that, hey, someone could have gone and put, and you cannot control this. This is a very difficult customer. You're not going to tell the customer that, right? So it's one of those oops moments. So I think the first thing is to really understand what capability you are building. And it could be, as I told you, over here, you don't control the agents. The agents are being provided to you by the third party. Salesforce is providing it to you. HubSpot is providing it to you. Some other service desk could be, you could be using Jira Insight or whatever. A whole bunch of these different places you're pulling the data. What is the data? What can the agent do? What it cannot do? What data it can access? And, if the agent comes up with something that it thought about, who's accountable for its action? So going back to what Karina said, I think implementing least privilege from day one is very important, because it's very hard to claw back permissions than to grant them incrementally as trust is earned. So treat your first deployment as a pilot. Go through tremendous amount of testing, especially when you're talking with all these different vendors and you're trying to provide a automatic bot that is going to be revolutionary for your customer service. Yes, but it also might do a 180 on you and hit you on the face. So you want to make sure that test it out like we always do with software. Test it out, look at some of the failure scenarios, kind of set the criteria for what is a success and what's a failure, and don't do a production rollout before you do that, because you really have to understand how it behaves before you start depending on it. Karina, I know you were shaking your head over there, so I'm sure I might have hit a couple of
no, I mean, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's something that we have to, I have several clients where AI is just forced on them with the subscriptions that they use. And the thing that I always encourage is go back to your contract and understand what your liability is, because
Correct.
maybe you want a secure version, downloadable version or something. Right? Whatever is your situation,
Yeah.
It's worth a conversation, and it's worth understanding kind of where your potential failure points are. So I think we need to do a closing wrap at this point, right?
Yeah, great points by both of you. My one recommendation will be something Karina mentioned earlier: is have an AI policy, right? There's a lot of benefits to it. One simple one is that it forces us to think about this stuff, right? If you're going to document it, you got to think about it. You should be talking to stakeholders throughout the company, and that in itself is almost always just going to be a good thing. Two, doing that alone is big for risk management and compliance purposes, and then also it's good to tell your teams what's okay to do and what's not, right? If we don't do that, they're going to assume, as they should, that they can do what they want with AI. That's why we have policies, right? We don't write these things just for the sake of it. And it has to be deeper than just compliance. Think about usefulness before compliance. It could be useful and compliant.
Well, I mean, the one thing I have to add to that is there's a horrible misconception that the documents out there are to appease the auditors. The reality is the documents are out there in your organizations to help you be successful. And if they're not written that way, they're written wrong. They're written using a template, and they're written using canned language, using words like ethereal, and sometimes and occasionally and periodically. Those are not auditable. Weekly is, monthly is, quarterly is. Every 5 minutes, that's auditable, right?
Yeah.
So try to write those documents in a way that helps your people be successful.
Yeah, great point, Karina. So Supro, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a fantastic discussion. Do you have any closing remarks for the audience briefly, and where can they find you?
Sure. Well, I'm available at supro@graphenesec.com. I would if anyone wants to connect with me, LinkedIn is the best. I'm Supro Ghose on LinkedIn too, so please do connect. And happy to be part of any other discussions on Agentic AI. I'm not going to claim that I'm the expert on Agentic AI. We are all part of the journey, and we are learning something new every day. And there's always something that hits you on the face, and then they're like, oh my God, now we got to start thinking a little differently. And that's the reason we are in this business and we are in this industry, because it keeps you humble.
Yep. Thank you so much for joining us, Supro. It was a wonderful treat to have you. My only closing statement is, please stop putting pictures and videos of kids online. Nobody needs to know their identity. Don't expose them to that.
Yep. Well said, Karina. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today, whether you're watching us live or you're going to watch it later. We know you have a lot of other things going on. Early next week, we're going to be announcing the June event. It's going to be a good one with an exciting guest. So thanks so much and have a great day.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Mike and Karina. Have a good day.
Bye.